Hi everyone, Janey here. Welcome back to my garden. Good morning. It was a beautiful morning out in the garden today. Jason and I got up early just to make sure that we could beat the heat. It's something that we've been focusing on lately because when it gets to be really hot here in Northern California, it's just not as much fun to go outside. And then by the end of the day, I'm missing it. I'm wishing that I had gotten a chance to get outside. So we are making it a point to go to bed early, to wake up early, and to get out. And I am absolutely loving it because early morning in the garden is my favorite time. So on this day, what I wanted to tackle was my back cut flower garden. Almost all the flowers that you see in these beds were sown via the cool flower method, which means you either sow them in the fall, the season before, or early spring, almost late winter. That gives you blooms so much earlier in the season that you can enjoy, but then by this time, they're pretty much done. So I went through and I cleaned up my foxgloves, my snapdragons, my asters, my stalk, my campanula. I did leave a lot of the blooms there because they were still looking so beautiful, but some of them I did have to clean up, but that just means I have more room for warm season annuals and warm season cut flowers that I can plant in the garden now. The next garden bed that I moved on to is my Snapdragon garden bed. And these snaps, they were all fall sown and they were all group 1 and 2 Snapdragons. And group 1 and 2 Snapdragons mean that they are going to bloom and perform better earlier in the season when it's cooler and the days are shorter. So now as we're getting to the summer solstice and everything is getting hotter, these Snapdragons, it's just too much for them and they're just not performing well. So I knew I needed to take these out today, but before I took them out, I had to do one last harvest of these beautiful blooms. So I took just about every color I had. I had velvet and white and pink and silver and peach, and the peach color is like the sunset color. It's just the most beautiful thing. You can see at this point, Jason made it outside to join me. He has been so wonderful helping me out in the garden. We have not gotten to all of our drip irrigation. We've been trying, we've been getting so much progress on it, but we still have some spots that we need to hand water. And so he's been taking that over. If you look closely, you can see that he has his earphones in and he likes to listen to podcasts and audiobooks. So he does that while I prefer to listen to the birds in the morning. And funny enough, the goats next door, they make quite a lot of noise in the morning. I just like the morning sounds. And then as the day goes on, it just seems like everything gets a little bit louder. So I really enjoy the morning sound. So I put all of my blooms together and I put it in this beautiful Haws pitcher that was a gift from my friend Betty. Haws is a brand that makes these beautiful metal watering cans. I don't have a watering can yet, but I'm just so thankful to have this beautiful pitcher, and it's just something very special to me. A lot of you have been asking for an update on the chickens. They are doing fabulous. They are just the cutest, sweetest things. They are still very skittish. When I walk in here, they will run to the other side. But if I sit down and I stay very still and I'm very patient, eventually they'll come up to me and see what type of food I have to give them. The bunnies, unfortunately, they are really affected by the heat. When it gets hot, I can see that they're starting to get stressed. So we'll let them come out here and we'll let them run around and play for a little while, but they haven't been out here as much. I think as we get into the fall weather and things cool down, they'll probably be able to hang out a little bit more with the chicks. In the back 2 garden beds, the garden beds that are closest to the greenhouse, this is where I did a little experiment last fall in that I took a bunch of flower seeds and I threw them out into these beds. I didn't do anything to them. I didn't water them in. I didn't pre-sprout them or anything. I had to let nature do its thing. I got this recommendation from Eileen from Van Winden's nursery. She gave me a list of flowers that this would work well for, including nasturtium, nigella, bells of Ireland, poppies, sweet peas. And I have to be honest, I was very skeptical. I am one of those gardeners that kind of needs to have a little bit more control. So just throwing these seeds out onto the ground and walking away was really a test of letting it go, letting nature take its course and trusting that nature will do what it needs to do. And she absolutely did. All of the flowers came up, every single one, and they were so beautiful. And I will definitely be doing this method again because it was so easy and they bloomed so well for me. But I do think that I will do it in a less conspicuous area. These two beds, I really wanted to sow other things in these beds, but they were filled up with these beautiful wildflowers. And I think that I could do the same method in a different place in my garden. So I think for next year, that's what I'm planning to do. Now, here's the drawback to this method of planting flowers. When you imagine throwing these seeds out onto the ground and absolutely doing nothing with them, basically, that's what I'm doing again right here. As I pull all of these spent blooms out, there's all these seed pods filled with tons and tons and tons of these flower seeds. And as I pull them out, I'm spilling these flower seeds all over this garden bed. So I know that in the fall, these seeds are going to take hold. And by next spring, I'm going to have poppies and sweet peas and nigella all over the place, which is that a problem? I don't really know. It's just another experiment or another practice of letting things go and letting nature take its course. So I'll have to see what happens, how many actually come up next spring. But for now, I'm growing my vegetables in these back two beds. I have tomatoes and I have cucumbers and I have squash and I have some basil and peppers as well. And I am happy to have this area look a little bit cleaner than it has for the past couple months. With all this garden waste, I'm not tossing it. I'm actually putting it into my compost pile. And my compost pile is not pretty. It's not fancy. It's literally just a pile of organic matter or garden waste. And I often think that composting can be overcomplicated. When you start talking about layering browns and greens and ratios and temperatures, I get super, super confused. So I have decided just to go with the most simple method, which is called cold composting. And basically what it is what I did right here. You make a pile of your garden waste and you just wait. It takes longer than the other method, but in about 6 months, I will have usable, beautiful compost to put back into my garden. So now that I had some empty garden beds to work with, before I planted anything in them, I wanted to address my emitter tubing. When I first planted up these garden beds, I put this inline emitter tubing in, I guess I would call it a swirl pattern or a wavy pattern. My thought was I was trying to get as much coverage as possible with the least amount of emitters as possible. I've been very concerned about the amount of water pressure I have from my water pump. So far, knock on wood, it's doing really well, and I don't seem to have any issue with water pressure. The way that I did lay out this emitter tubing, though, I was having a lot of issues with it in that the emitters were never exactly where I needed them to be, where I wanted the plants to be planted, and some of the plants weren't getting watered when they needed to get watered. It was just kind of a disorganized mess. So this past week, I had gone to Deb Cozy's house down in Southern California in the mountains of San Diego, and she had cut flower beds that had very organized lines of inline emitter tubing, and it looked so good, and I had emitter jealousy, and I had to come home, and I knew that I was going to do it the way that Deb did it, which is just lines of inline emitter tubing down these beds. So this garden bed is about 4 feet wide, so what I did is I spaced these emitter tubings, these 1/4 inch emitter tubings, every 12 inches. So there was 12 inches in between each line. What I'm planning to plant in this garden bed right now is the ultimate hot weather cut flower, and that is zinnias. So this emitter tubing, it has emitters every 6 inches. And for this garden bed right here, I sowed my zinnia seeds every 12 inches. So every other emitter is what I did in this garden bed. But I did do one other garden bed in this exact same method with the lines of emitter tubing straight down like this. And I actually sowed those zinnias every 6 inches. And I kind of just want to see the difference and see how they do. I've always thought of you sow zinnias 9 inches apart. That's kind of just what I have in my mind. So it could go either way, basically. So it'll be really interesting to see how the zinnias do 12 inches apart versus how they do 6 inches apart, which is a little tight, but I think that they'll be okay. So now, if you could believe it, I don't think I've ever had this problem before, but I was actually low on zinnia seeds. So what I did is I took all the zinnia seeds that I did have. I had like a couple left in a bunch of packs, including Benary Giant Lime Zinnia, Uproar Rose Zinnia, Queen Red Lime Zinnia, and then I actually had some Benary's Giant Purple ones that I had harvested from zinnias in my last garden, and I mixed them all together in this little strawberry treat tin. And so it's going to be a surprise on what zinnias come up. I'm a little worried about the zinnia seeds that I harvested from the Benary's Giant Purple zinnias, just because it was 2 years ago when I harvested those. I'll see if they come up, and if they don't come up, then I'll just re-sow some other zinnias. But it's just going to be a complete mix of all these beautiful colors of zinnias, and I'm excited to see the surprise of which ones come up first, which ones grow faster, all that fun stuff. So in this garden bed is where I planted the zinnias 6 inches apart. And if you're wondering what that random shrub is on the other side of the garden bed, I don't blame you. It's a very weird place to put a shrub. And so what it is, it's actually the juiced orange jessamine from Proven Winners. The reason that it's there is because last fall I fell and I broke my foot, and I knew I was going to have surgery. So in a last-ditch effort to kind of save all these plants that I had not planted yet, I had planned to do a ton of fall planting. I ended up just kind of putting a lot of plants wherever. And this plant was not looking good by that time. It needed to be getting in the ground, but I was in emergency mode. So I had this empty garden bed in the back garden, and I literally just stuck this shrub wherever I could find it. And I left it there. And I thought, okay, well, if it survives, it survives. If it dies, it dies. It survived. It is very happy, and I know I need to dig it out and transplant it soon, but I don't quite know where I want to put it yet. So if you see a random jessamine juiced orange in my cut flower garden bed, that is why. So after I finished sowing all the zinnias, watering them in, I decided to hook up the rest of the beds to drip. The vegetables that I had in the back 2 beds weren't hooked up to drip yet. Jason had been hand watering them. So I went around and I made sure that those were hooked up to our drip irrigation system so we didn't have to worry about it. And then you know how it is when you're out in the garden and you're having a good time, and one thing leads to another. I started pruning my iceberg rose standards, making sure those look good, got in the back, started pruning some foxgloves, and so on and so on and so on. And it was a lovely, wonderful morning. I could have gone more, I could have done more, but I had to get on with the rest of my day. So I appreciate you all joining me for this gorgeous morning in the garden. I had a lovely time. I got covered with soil from head to toe, but those are the best gardening days. So I hope you all enjoyed this, and I hope you all have a chance to get in your garden today.